Well, that was about the ugliest game that you're ever gonna see. Pretty much the only part of that game that wasn't an ugly, embarrassing mess for the Kraken were Kokko's pads, which are pretty cool. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, with the Seattle Kraken for the 5th, 6th, 7th time this season bewilderingly just entirely show up as a completely different team than they did the game before. The game before, even in a 4-1 loss to the Tampa Bay Lightning, they played one of the best 60-minute games they have all season and just ran into a team, and especially a goaltender, that were on their game. And considering you had a goaltender making his NHL debut against a multiple-time Vezina winner and future Hall of Famer, yeah, they certainly had the better goaltender as well, which is taking nothing away from Stecka, who did end up getting sent back down to the AHL, where heel split starts with Grubauer, and Kokko came up in his place, but with no more back-to-backs, at least for a little bit anyway. The move, I think, was largely made so that you could reward Kokko for the great progress that he's made, so he can come up, get some practices in with the NHL team, and just experience what it's like being with an NHL team for a bit of a road trip and some games at home. And eventually they'll end up probably bringing Grubauer back, who's played pretty well at the AHL level. Now, I don't think this necessarily changes what the future for Grubauer and the team look like. We kind of discussed that already. But it does sound like they're likely to bring Grubauer back for the end of the season, and Stecka and Kokko will go back to the Firebirds, where they'll eventually have a playoff run with that team, since they are actually playing pretty well. So again, I don't think that sending Stecka down was in any way the team saying that they didn't like how he played that one game in Tampa Bay. I think it's a situation that was probably predetermined. They saw that back-to-back on the schedule coming up. They knew it had to be either Stecka or Kokko, and you certainly would rather protect your young prospect goaltender a little bit more. So he brings Stecka up, who's been playing pretty well at the AHL and has done a lot of hard work at lower levels to finally earn that at least one game, that first game at the highest level. And then you make the swap, bring Kokko up so he can get some practices with the NHL team, just be around an NHL team in general. And maybe he doesn't even end up getting in a game, but you can send him back down. I certainly don't think that the plan was that they would bring Kokko up, knowing that the team was going to utterly collapse in front of Daccord and force them to put him in midway through a game where nobody was bothering to play any kind of defense. And yet that's exactly what the Kraken end up doing, completely falling apart, collapsing in front of whoever was in net. It changed midway through the game, and that's because this team looks so disorganized. I mean, quite literally, I think I've seen more organized defensive play in your own end of the ice from fresh out of learn to play adult league players. You could probably put 5 drunk guys out there and they'd still figure out how to play better defense than what the Kraken did throughout the vast majority of this game. And I wish I had some kind of explanation or could get even close to pinpointing maybe part of why this team is so incredibly inconsistent this season. I mean, for one thing, if I could do that, I'd probably have a job in the front office by the end of the week, because I don't think anybody in the organization, much less in that locker room, has any idea why this team will show up and play a great game against a good team, and even if they come up short, you can still hold your head high about how you played those 60 minutes, and then 2 days later, they come out and look worse than most AHL teams. Heck, there's probably WHL teams that could have beaten the Kraken the way they played in this game. And look, as I'm sure I've said before, when the Kraken have a stinker of a game like this one out of seemingly nowhere, we get that these things happen every now and then. It's a long season. Eventually, you're going to just have a night where things don't come together. Guys don't show up on time, whatever the case may be. It would be understandable, and you could maybe make it as a one-off excuse if it was more of a one-off or once or twice over the course of a season. But this is already we're 3/4 of the way through the season, but this is the 6th, 7th, 8th time maybe this season that we've seen the Kraken make this complete flip one night, heck, maybe even a few nights in a row. They look like that team that I'm sure Ron Francis envisioned them being when he put them together. The team that's on that 100-point pace, getting back into the postseason, and maybe even making it through a round if a miracle happens, to a deep playoff run, and starting this march towards a consistent playoff team that ownership wants them to be here in the very, very near future. And then all of a sudden, for no discernible reason whatsoever, they'll have a day break, come back, and they look completely unrecognizable. It's the same names, same numbers out on the ice, but for whatever reason, now they look like a team that is desperately trying to get the first overall pick. Heck, I think you could say they look worse than a team desperately trying to get the first overall pick because they have twice in such games lost to those teams. And of course, as anybody who's watched this team at all this season knows, they're not only wildly inconsistent from game to game, they're also wildly inconsistent within just about every game that they've played. Just look at how they play the first, second, and then third period. They are all very much their own one. The first period, it's generally not the best for the Kraken, but it's a bit of a mixed bag. Every now and then they have a good first period. The second period then is a complete disaster just about every time. And then the third period, well, the one silver lining to this team this season has been, regardless of how they play the first 40 minutes, they at least usually find a way to make it interesting in the final 20. That is, except for when they give up 6 goals in the first 40 minutes. Which brings us back to this game, where I'm not even sure if I've said the final score yet, but it was 7-2. The Kraken, a complete disaster throughout pretty much the entirety of this game until we get to garbage time. I mean, yeah, the last 3 goals are pretty much scored in what you could consider garbage time, and in this case, that is the entire third period, because by the time we got to the third period, it was already 6-0, and yeah, there's no coming back from that, not even with how much of a propensity the Kraken have had for coming back this season. I mean, barring a historic NHL event, it just was not anywhere near going to happen. But before we get there to the one period where, weirdly enough, the Kraken, after going down 6-0, ended up winning the third period 2-1. Again, granted that the Blues, I'm sure, hardly cared at that point. They already knew that they had the 2 points and the standings locked in. But we should probably get to how we get to that 6-0 in the first 40 minutes. Now the Kraken, coming off of 2 games where they played pretty well in the first period, get off to a pretty good start in the first couple minutes, but it quickly turns around and it is all Blues for the entire rest of the first period. I mean, through the middle of the period, about a 10-minute window from around 5-6 minutes into the game till the last couple minutes of the first, the Kraken went completely shotless. They didn't even get a shot on goal. Meanwhile, during that same time, the Blues open up the scoring. And the first one, while it is a nice play from the most talented forward the Blues have to offer in Jordan Kyrou, it all starts off a lost faceoff for the Kraken. Beniers losing that faceoff just outside the Kraken blue line, so they've at least ramped up the difficulty for quickly giving up goals off lost faceoffs. This one isn't in their own end just yet, but they still lose the faceoff. The Blues quickly turn it around and get a rush chance towards the net, which, off a faceoff there, it's not even like it's a rush down the other way after a block shot or something. You got an odd man chance. No, the Blues create this while all 5 Kraken players have really no reason not to be already in the defensive end as soon as that puck is won back for the Blues. And yet we still get a case where it's kind of a 2-on-2. You've got Beniers and one Blues player who still manages to get a step on Beniers towards the net in kind of the front of the crease by the time Kyrou ends up taking this shot. And then you've got Kyrou who gets past whatever winger was with him, and right in front of Jamie Alexiak, he puts a move on Alexiak that completely breaks his ankles, or at least gets him turned around to the point where Kyrou has all the open ice he wants to skate into a dangerous area on the inside, low slot area inside of the faceoff circle, and fires off a perfect shot to make it 1-0. Now again, sure, while Alexiak does kind of end up being the one that looks silly out of all this, I still don't want to put it entirely all on him as a bad defensive play just in his own right, because even if he hadn't gotten juked so bad by Kyrou that he ended up on the other side of the Mississippi River, you still had a player that was a step past Beniers and the entire rest of the Kraken defense for that matter at the top of the crease, so even if Alexiak had stayed in front of Kyrou and forced him to make a pass, you still have a guy that's right there with all of the space with that half step that he needs to get his stick on the ice in front of the net at the top of the crease and tip in a well-placed pass from Kyrou, which he's more than capable of doing. There were multiple ways that this puck could have ended up in the back of the net past Daccord without really too much that he could do about it other than try to make a spectacular save, which he would still end up doing a couple more times in this game. So if the Kraken can't keep the puck out of their own net at 5-on-5 when losing a faceoff outside their own blue line, that means it's probably going to be pretty important for them to win the faceoff at the start of a penalty kill a couple minutes later when they're down a man and the faceoff is in their end of the ice. But no, they lose that faceoff too, and I bet you can guess what happens. That's right, 8 seconds later, it's in the back of the net to make it 2-0 Blues with the power play goal. And to be perfectly honest, Sure, the Kraken had 4 players out there, but they might as well have all stayed on the bench as they did pretty much nothing to stop the Blues from scoring this goal. It's just a quick tic-tac-toe passing play, a wide open guy that got past all of the Kraken down by the goal line, then passes it up to another wide open Blues player in the slot for the one-time shot. No chance for Daccord. And, well, yeah, I already told you the Blues are now up 2-0. Mercifully for the Kraken, that is where the bleeding would stop for them in what was, even by their standards, a pretty poor first period. So we head to the second with the Kraken down those 2 goals. And once again, just like with the first, they get off to a pretty good start. Heck, they even get off to a notably better start than they got off to in the first. Absolutely peppering Jordan Binnington through the start of the period, a power play that the Kraken had that doesn't end up scoring, but has a few pretty good looks on it. And then they continue that momentum out of the power play until all of a sudden it just disappears and the disaster well and truly starts. Now, I suppose with all that talk that we had earlier on in the video about the lack of consistency the Kraken have had this season in all sorts of different ways, one thing that has stayed consistent is the second period is almost always worse than the first. It was in the first 2 games of this road trip coming back from the break. And once again, even with a really bad first period, it was significantly worse here in the second, and it starts right after the Kraken lose that momentum a few minutes into the period. Right back the other way, the Blues get a couple guys past the Kraken defense. It's a pass out in front of the net to a Blues player wide open. He fires the shot on net. Daccord, reading it perfectly, makes the first save, but the rebound goes off of his pad, flies up in the air, and then it's a nice hands-eye coordination play to baseball bat it out of the air, off of Daccord's back end into the net behind him to give the Blues the 3-0 lead. So once again, just to recap with this one, the Kraken, after making a pretty nice push to try and get back into this game and make up for a bad first period, completely fall apart defensively, negating all of that and making it worse by allowing a 2-on-1 chance back the other way, which is so bad that the guy who ends up getting the goal has 2 chances to get the puck into the back of the net. And even after Daccord makes a very nice save on the first one to try and bail the Kraken out, because he had all that time, he's able to whack that second one out of the air to give the Blues that 3-0 lead. And as we look at the screenshot, you can see just how bad it was. I mean, for one thing, the one player back for the Kraken is Josh Mahura, and well, Mahura has been pretty good for the Kraken so far this season. He's still your 6th defenseman, and probably the last person you'd pick to have as the lone person back. I mean, maybe there's some forwards like Chandler Stevenson, for example, who, as it turns out, is the 2nd person back. He's the closest Kraken player to this play, the next guy in. And I guess there's kind of 2 ways of looking at this. You could look at it as, yet again, Chandler Stevenson blowing his coverage defensively and allowing a player to get 2 shots off on Daccord in point-blank range. Of course, the other way to look at it is Chandler Stevenson is the only other one within even a chance of breaking up this play whatsoever. So that kind of raises an eyebrow at everybody else, including whoever the 2nd defenseman was on the ice at this time. And real quick here, just as a humorous aside in a, well, not great way, but I guess you gotta find the humor in games like this to not go completely crazy. Well, it turns out this save Daccord made before the rebound was hit in past him anyway. Well, the game went so poorly that that save is the one that the Kraken Hockey Network picked as their save of the game around the start of the 3rd period. So yeah, this game went so poorly for the Kraken that the save of the game was one where the puck ended up in the back of the net seconds later anyway. Now, apparently what the Kraken took out of all of this was not to get Daccord a little bit more help, or at least try to play something that even resembles defense at an NHL level. Heck, just defense at a basic hockey level. No, what we would be forgetting if we expected the Kraken to actually try in this game is that in this game, they showed up with that mindset of doing everything they can to get the first overall pick, and with a goaltender as good as Daccord has been this season, that means that you can't even let him have the chance of making that first save like he did on the previous goal. I mean, that was dangerously close to Daccord keeping that one out of the net. So a couple minutes later, they solved that by not giving Daccord any chance whatsoever. It's another odd man chance generated by the Blues. This one's not even off of a rush necessarily. It's just horrendous defense by the Kraken, as it's Montour back on what's essentially a 2-on-1, though I don't even think he realizes it's a 2-on-1, as he's kind of trying to block off a passing lane to the backside, though I don't think he realizes just how wide open the player on the backside is, or he'd be doing the thing you see a defender do on a back check on a 2-on-1, where they put their knee or sometimes their entire body on the ice to block off that pass along it. Instead, you've got Daccord on the one side because there's a guy with a wide open shot at the net, so he's taking any shot away from there. The pass gets through, and it's an empty net to shoot at. You can see in the screenshot, Daccord just kind of looking back like, really, guys? What the actual... Now, I suppose, to be perfectly fair, not every single one of the goals scored by the Blues in this game was a direct result of horrendous defense by the Kraken. I mean, even calling it horrendous defense is being a little bit generous. It really doesn't even resemble defense what the Kraken played throughout the vast majority of this game in their own end of the ice. And an example of a goal that wasn't necessarily caused by that would be the one that comes just a minute or a little bit over a minute after the Blues make it 4-0 when it becomes 5-0 off a shot that comes from way up by the blue line. I don't know if Daccord can't really see it through the traffic in between him and where the shot comes from. Maybe he's adjusting from one side to the other to try and pick that shot up when it comes, and he just doesn't see it until it's too late, or maybe it deflected off of something on the way in. I mean, that would be a very Kraken this season thing to happen, that it goes off the leg of a Kraken defenseman, and that's how it ends up past Daccord. Either way, it's past Daccord. It's 5-0 Blues halfway through the second period, and at this point, well, Milesman had enough, and I don't think this is a comment on Daccord. It was really one of those goaltender switches where you're just trying to wake your team up, get them to do something to help out a goaltender, and if they're not going to help out Daccord because, I mean, he is a very accomplished now NHL goaltender. Maybe not, he's only a couple years into his NHL career as far as being a full-time starter or a regular player even, but he's still a goaltender that can hold his own and defend himself, if you will, even in the face of terrible play in front of him. I mean, for the most part anyway. Obviously, the Kraken in this game had already given him a couple situations that no goaltender in the NHL could handle, but if they're not going to do anything to help Daccord out a little bit more, maybe they will actually show up to help out a young 20-year-old rookie goaltender in his first moments in the NHL. You'd think so, right? I mean, at this point, the game's pretty much already lost anyway, so you might as well at least have some pride and try to pretend that you at least still understand the very basics of how to play defense in the NHL. Never mind the NHL, just how to play defense in hockey in general, and do your best to protect the first NHL experience of your young future of the franchise potentially goaltender in Kokko. Or instead you could just keep skating out there like you're on public skate time, just sticking puck, not really paying attention to what anybody else is doing, and leave him out to dry just like you did with Daccord. Well, if you thought the Kraken would protect Kokko and play defense and respond to the message that was being sent to them by that goaltending change, then either you didn't watch the game or you're not really reading the tone of the video very well. But they leave Kokko out to dry just like they did with Daccord. Within minutes, it's 6-0 Blues, and just like with the goal that made it 4-0 Blues not that long before this, there's absolutely no chance for Kokko on this play. And once again, just like with that goal, it's a pass from a wide open player on one side of the Kraken end to a wide open player on the other side of the Kraken end. This time, there's a few more Kraken players, at least in the frame between where the shot is taken and when it ends up hitting the netting with... yeah, nothing Kokko can do about it behind him, but none of them are in any position to do really anything about the pass or the shot, so it's an easy one pass, one shot. I mean, it's not a tap-in goal, but it's one of the easiest goals that Jacob Neighbors will probably ever score, and it's 6-0 Blues. After just one, maybe two saves in the NHL, Kokko left out to dry, gives up his first goal. Now the Kraken defensively, since Kokko was unable to make that spectacular highlight reel save, well, they make sure a couple minutes later that he has a chance to make another pretty spectacular save. It's not nearly as dangerous or as guaranteed to be a goal of a chance as the one that got past him, but it's still a pretty good chance for the Blues. Kokko comes up with a good save there, and then the Kraken decide that it's his time to face a penalty kill. So with 1:50 left in the second period, the Kraken go to the kill again, and this time get to the intermission without giving up a power play goal. And they even managed to kill off the remaining 10 seconds of that power play to start out the third. Not that it matters, it's 6-0 at that point, but at least it helps Kokko out a little bit. Of course, 10 seconds later, the puck is in the back of the net behind him, and you can be forgiven for thinking that they were still on the power play, since there's a player wide open, standing right in front of Kokko, that is able to tip the puck in past him off the shot from the wide open player up by the blue line. Now, it's a little bit more understandable to leave a player wide open at the blue line to take a shot, but there's absolutely no excuse when you are at 5-on-5 and have been for 10 seconds to allow a player to stand completely unchecked. Heck, he's in his own zip code in front of Kokko. It's just the two of them standing there together. The puck is tipped at the last second. Kokko has his glove in the right spot, but with that deflection, it goes over his glove into the net, and it's 7-0 Blues. At which point, I can't really imagine there were many Kraken fans still left watching this game that aren't either covering the team or masochistic, so it would be understandable if you missed the entire rest of the third period, where the Kraken finally do kind of show up, sort of. I mean, I don't really know whether it was the Kraken showing up a little bit towards the end of this third period in the back half of it, or if it was just the Blues figuring this game was over and losing interest, as they make a couple of bad defensive mistakes of their own. I guess they saw the Kraken doing it a bunch and just figured, why not try it ourselves and see what happens? Well, two more Blues players end up scoring, though this time they're both former Blues players. First, it's Vince Dunn after a failed clear from the Blues out of their end of the ice. Dunn picks up the turnover, skates it into the high slot, fires off a perfect shot to score the unassisted goal. And then a little while later in the game, a shot from Larson from way up by the blue line goes wide in the net, but goes off the end boards behind it, out to the far side, where Jane Schwartz is completely left on an island by himself, just like the Kraken were doing with Blues players throughout the entire first 40 minutes. And he has a completely empty net to put it into. He takes his time to make sure it gets into the net. It does. The Kraken score to make it 7-2. Though the Kraken did have to challenge this one to get it to count as a goal for Schwartz. It was originally called a goal, then the refs come together and change the call on the ice to no goal for goaltender interference. The Kraken challenge, Binnington had complained to the officials that Kokko had made contact with him while crossing in front of the crease, but as it turns out, and it was very clear on the replay, that it was the defender following Kokko across the front of the crease that actually makes contact with Binnington and takes him out of the net. I still don't know that he would have much of a chance to make a save on Schwartz's shot, but it certainly gave Schwartz that extra couple of seconds to make absolutely no mistake about putting it in. Either way, they overturn it. It is a goal. Somewhere in there earlier on, I can't remember if it was before or after Dunn's goal, the Blues did score again, but that one was waved off immediately for goaltender interference because the player in front of the net for the Blues pushed Dunn into Kokko. So that's, I mean, you can't make contact with the goaltender and you can't push a teammate of the goaltender into him to make contact either. Neither one's allowed, so that one got waved off. It could have been an 8-2 game, but the refs got both of those correct, and in the end, it makes no difference really in the outcome. The Kraken lose 7-2 in one of the most embarrassing losses of the season. I would call it the most embarrassing loss, but I still feel like losing back-to-back games to the Sharks is right up there with it, especially after losing a game to the Ducks before it. And then there's the game in Chicago. There's been a few throughout the season. And yeah, given recency bias, that's why I want to say this one is, especially considering the Kraken couldn't even pull it together to play well in front of a young goaltender playing his first minutes in the NHL. I mean, it's one thing to not give the help to a guy like Daccord, who they kind of know can bail them out from time to time, or even not give the help to Grubauer, who they're used to being back there. And I mean, if nothing else, he's at least used to being hung out to dry by the team in front of him. But then to not even have the pride to go out there and put in some kind of defensive effort to give any kind of help whatsoever to Kokko, embarrassing is just about the only word I could think of to describe the Kraken performance in this game. Now, with that said, and this is absolutely no excuse for the Kraken playing the way they did, I'm not particularly worried about this hurting Kokko's confidence going forward. I mean, if anything, he's still had a couple of moments of handling the puck a lot behind the Kraken net after he'd given up the couple of goals later on in the third period, one of which did almost cost him. He had a bit of an adventure behind the net, got the puck taken off of his stick. One of those where, things happen a little faster at the NHL level. Guys read plays a bit quicker and can get to you faster. So maybe a bit of an eye-opener for him there, but he still managed to scramble back in front of the net and dive it in front of the shot, so he bailed himself out at the very least. And the fact that he was willing to go out and do those couple of times handling the puck a bit, to me it seemed like he didn't really shake him too much, the stuff that happened before in the game. And besides, it's not like he started the game and had all those goals going past him. I think maybe there you could see that hurting his confidence a little bit, even with the team playing horrendous defense in front of him. At least now you can see that a good goaltender in Daccord that's had a lot of success at the NHL level, even in front of some shaky defense at times, was getting absolutely shelled and had no chance. So Kokko goes in and he has a similar experience, but at least there he can see the comparable of, yeah, maybe that one wasn't on me. So while I understand the questioning of how wise it was to send a rookie goaltender into a game where you knew your team was playing as poorly as they were, I don't really think it's going to have any kind of long-term effects on his progression, his progress. I mean, he's not going to be at an NHL level on a consistent basis anyway, probably for another couple of years at the very least. He'll have to really prove himself at the AHL level before they bring him up to be behind or in tandem with Daccord. And that's ideally the long-term goal here. So you don't want to continue to send him out and continue to have experiences like this one if he has too many more of these type of games, even if it is more of the defense in front of him that's costing him, then maybe some confidence stuff starts to creep in. But just this one 30-minute effort in relief for a goaltender that was getting hung out to dry even more so than Kokko was, I don't personally think it's a big deal or anything to read into much. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Beyond that, I don't know what more there is to say about this game other than it was a complete embarrassment, sloppy mess, terrible, shambolic defensive nightmare for the Kraken. I don't know. I'm running out of things to say and running out of voice to say it with. The Kraken, for whatever reason, I can't imagine that anybody on the Kraken, in the Kraken organization, watches these videos, but it is a little bit curious that they seem to recently be saving these horrendous games where I really just want to rant and rave and yell at them a bit for the days where my voice really just does not have it to go into them as much as I'd like to, but I tried to make it work. Let me know what you think. There's not going to be stars for this game. I think that's pretty obvious. I mean, I'd like to give Kokko a star for his NHL debut, but yeah, the Kraken just didn't play well enough for anybody to get a star. Vince Dunn at least seemed to be the one player on the team that cared. Aside from that, it was all Blues or all Blues and a couple former Blues in this one. And the Kraken better show up and have some pride against the Canucks when they come home in a few days. Until then, though, again, let me know your thoughts down in the comments section below. As always, stay safe out there. Be good to each other. God bless, and go Kraken.